Have you ever stopped to think about how a single lost dream, an unfulfilled promise, and the last word spoken right before a stray bullet hits can completely rewrite a person's entire existence? I still feel that exact moment burning in my chest. The old man's breathing was ragged, blood soaking through the dirt beneath him, and in his fading eyes there was only one thing left. A vision he knew he would never get to see with his own eyes. He called my name, Yoshiharu, his voice cracking under the weight of exhaustion, and told me that his castle, his ambition, every single dream he carried, it had to become mine. I was screaming at him, reaching out, desperate to pull him back from the edge, but the whistle of gunfire tearing through the air drowned out everything. Right before the darkness swallowed me, he whispered his true name, Kinoshita Tokichiro, and in that split second, my soul froze. I wasn't just watching a cutscene anymore. I was staring directly at the man who would become Toyotomi Hideyoshi. If he died here, if history broke at this exact seam, everything I knew would shatter into nothing. I begged him to hold on. I shouted until my throat burned, but the world dissolved into static. And when I finally forced my eyes open, there was no ceiling, no modern sky, no familiar streets, just heavy, dust-choked air, the creak of old timber, and a world that felt terrifyingly, undeniably real. Suddenly the atmosphere shifts. I'm standing in the middle of a cracked, sun-baked battlefield, and right in front of me, a girl is on her knees, armor dented, breathing ragged, surrounded by enemy soldiers with their blades already drawn. She wasn't just some random civilian. You could see it in the way she held her posture even while bleeding. There was royalty in her spine, but also raw human fear in her eyes. My legs moved before my brain could even process it. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and my mind was screaming at me that, "Bro, this is not a video game. You don't get extra lives here." But my body just refused to stop. I stepped forward and yelled at the top of my lungs to leave her alone, to back off from this beautiful girl right now. The soldiers just turned their heads slowly, giving me this cold, dead-eyed stare. One of them actually asked if I was part of the Oda forces, and pointed out that my hands were completely empty. I looked down at my own trembling, sweat-soaked palms and literally thought to myself, man, what was I even thinking? I don't have a sword, I don't have armor, I'm just a guy in weird clothes. But then, the small rectangular box in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling, and pressed the only button I knew would work. The second I did, a massive echoing battle cry blasted through the valley so loud that even the birds scattered from the trees. It wasn't magic, it wasn't some ancient war horn. It was just the DLC battle soundtrack from my phone, the one I'd loaded for that strategy game. The enemy soldiers actually stepped back, their eyes wide with panic, whispering to each other about whether this tiny glass box was hiding an entire army inside it. Was I a sorcerer? Did I command spirits? They were terrified, and just that fear alone made them turn their heads, looking for the threat behind them. But wait a minute. The screen went black. The sound cut out. The battery died. Right there, in the middle of my greatest bluff. And I'm just standing there, mouth open, thinking, I should have charged it, bro. I literally forgot to plug it in overnight, and this is where the real game begins. The enemy commander snapped out of his confusion and ordered the strike, but before a single blade could swing, the ground started trembling. Hoofbeats, hundreds of them. The Oda main force had arrived. The enemy broke formation instantly, scattering into the trees like frightened deer, and the girl slowly pushed herself up from the dirt. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding, but she didn't thank me. She didn't even smile. She just walked straight toward me, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and something else. A weird, flustered pride I couldn't quite place. She asked if I really served the Oda clan, and I just nodded, too exhausted to speak. Then, without warning, she shoved me backward, planted her boot right on my chest, and pinned me to the ground. I was completely stunned, staring up at the sky, wondering what universe I had just fallen into. She looked down at me and said in this sharp, commanding tone that a low-ranking Ashigaru foot soldier had no right to press down the head of the Oda clan's leader. I swallowed hard, confused, and muttered that the head of the Oda clan is supposed to be Oda Nobunaga. She took a slow, deep breath, her eyes locking onto mine, and said, "Nobunaga doesn't exist. I am Oda Nobuna." And right there, lightning struck my brain. The name carved into every history book as a ruthless, unstoppable warlord was standing over me as a girl. I was completely lost, my mind spinning in circles, but the fire in her gaze, man, that was the gaze of a true ruler. It didn't matter what gender history wrote down. Her will was absolute. Here we see how she actually tested me. She asked if I wanted to enter her service, and I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. But the second I butchered the pronunciation of her name, her temper snapped. She actually flicked my cheek, sharp and fast, and scolded me like a disappointed teacher, asking how I could possibly serve someone when I couldn't even say their name correctly. I apologized immediately, stammering, but she cut me off and corrected me. Nobuna, not Nobunaga. Then she demanded my name. I gave it, Sagara Yoshiharu. And she just gave this cold, almost amused smirk and said, "Fine, so you're a monkey." I literally yelled back that I'm not a monkey, but she just turned away like I was a stray dog barking at a wall. I mean, bro, I was standing there wondering if this girl was completely unhinged, or if time itself had decided to play a prank on me. Right then, another figure stepped forward. Shibata Katsue. Her presence was like a wildfire. Long hair, sharp eyes, an aura of pure, untamed strength that you could feel in the air. I accidentally locked eyes with her, and before I could even blink, she snapped at me not to stare at her chest. I immediately looked at the sky, sweating, and internally face-palmed. Man, this is literally the replacement for that grizzled old general from my game. Nobuna stepped in, saying that since I saved her life, I was to be spared. Katsui backed down, but the suspicion in her eyes didn't fade. Then Niwa Nagahide arrived, known as Manchio, calm, calculating, and already assessing my worth. She didn't even waste words. She just suggested giving the monkey the job of polishing her lady's shoes. Nobuna smiled, and I was internally screaming, "Bro, I'm from the future. I know the entire war map. Don't make me a janitor." But she just said I scored 70 points, and I swallowed my pride, bowed my head, and followed. But listen, bro, don't ignore this moment, because the story doesn't just stop there. I ended up at a quiet roadside inn, where an old man named Osa Asano gave me a place to rest. He looked at me, chuckled, and said my face reminded him of his younger days. He actually offered me a deal. Marry his daughter, take over the inn, and settle down. I was genuinely surprised, and just asked to meet her first. Then she walked in. Nene. Her smile was so warm, so gentle, it instantly made my chest tighten. But my brain immediately hit the brakes. Bro, she's literally a kid right now. Marriage is completely off the table. I politely backed out, and she just giggled, calling me Mr. Monkey in this soft, teasing voice. I tried correcting her again, but the nickname was already glued to me. Before I could even process the irony, another girl appeared. Hachisuka Gomon. She spoke in broken, careful phrases, long sentences clearly exhausting her. But her eyes, they held this unbreakable loyalty. She said she came to serve in her master Tokichiro's place. She called herself the Vine, and me the Tree. She promised to walk through this world in my shadow. I just stood there, completely overwhelmed. No way home, no money, no weapons, but a chance. A real, breathing chance. I looked up at the sky, felt the wind on my face, and made a silent promise to the old man whose dream I now carried. All right, Hideyoshi, from this day forward, I'm taking your place. I'll walk this path. I'll fight for it. I won't let it end here. And right here, everything changes. Far away, in the Imagawa stronghold, the air was thick with frustration. Imagawa Yoshimoto was tearing into her officers for failing to capture Nobuna. Standing quietly beside her was Matsudaira Motoyasu, the man who would one day be known as Tokugawa Ieyasu, but right now, just a hungry, tired subordinate. He was quietly munching on potatoes because he'd literally only eaten potatoes for 4 days straight. When Yoshimoto threatened to cut his pay again, his eyes actually watered. I mean, man, you look at the greatest strategists in history and forget they started out as broke, hungry kids just trying to survive. But the real storm was brewing somewhere else entirely. In Mino province, Saito Dosen had stopped his own son from launching an attack. He told him outright, "We don't kill her. We ally with her." Everyone around him was stunned. The man known as the Viper of Mino, feared by every warlord in Japan, was suggesting peace. But his eyes held something else, a quiet, dangerous clarity. He said that to conquer a nation, you have to do the exact thing no one expects. So just think for a second. When I finally heard that Dosen wanted a meeting with Nobuna, my mind started racing through every memory, every cutscene, every tutorial I'd ever played. I knew exactly where it happened. I stood in front of Nobuna, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You don't believe I'm from the future? Fine, I'll prove it. You're going to meet Saito Dosen at Shotokuji Temple." She frowned, confused, telling me we hadn't even decided on a location yet. And right on cue, a messenger sprinted into the room, bowing, and announced that Mino Province had officially chosen Shotokuji Temple as the meeting ground. Nobuna's eyes went completely wide. She stared at me like I just pulled a rabbit out of thin air, and actually gave me 90 points. I just smiled, holding back a laugh, thinking, bro, that's just basic lore. That's chapter 1. The temple meeting felt like walking into the climax of a war epic. Nobuna arrived with 500 arquebusiers, the smell of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. Dosen watched silently, his face unreadable. Then Nobuna gave the order, "Fire." Her men hesitated. Those early firearms were notorious for exploding in your hands if mishandled. But she didn't blink. She just told them that if they were too cowardly to light the fuse, they weren't fit to wear her colors. The shots rang out, smoke billowed, and Dosan's expression shifted. He wasn't scared. He was impressed. He was weighing whether she was a reckless fool or a born leader. Nobuna stepped forward, and I finally noticed the quiet figure standing beside Dosan, Akechi Mitsuhide. Sharp eyes, calm posture, already analyzing every detail. I nudged Nobuna to start talking, and she didn't waste time. She looked Dosen in the eye and said she wanted Mino Province. He actually laughed, asking why he would just hand over the heart of Japan. She didn't flinch. She said she would tear down the old, rotting systems, shatter the feudal chains, and build a new Japan strong enough to stand against the Western powers. Dosan's smile faded. His eyes locked onto hers. For the first time, he saw someone who wasn't just playing the game. Someone who wanted to change the board entirely. But here's the twist. I stepped forward, right between them, and looked straight at Dosen. I said, "After this meeting, you're going to tell your generals to tie their horses at the gates of the Fool's Castle in Owari. Am I right?" The air literally froze. Dosan's breath caught. He asked, voice barely above a whisper, how I could possibly read his mind. I didn't blink. I told him I came from 450 years into the future. I told him that centuries from now, his name would be carved into history as a legendary visionary. And I told him that if he refused to hand Mino to Nobuna, every single thing he'd built, every sacrifice, every drop of blood, it would all be for nothing. Dosen didn't speak. The silence stretched so long, it felt heavy enough to crush stone. Then, slowly, he let out a long breath. He bowed his Weibo head. He said he was outmatched. He signed the document right there, on the spot, and officially handed Mino Province to Nobuna. The Owari-Mino alliance was sealed in a single breath. I finally let myself exhale, but Nobuna's eyes, They were still burning. The fire hadn't dimmed. It had only grown. And this is where the real game begins, all over again. The moment the meeting ended, Nobuna called out to me. She told me to bring her shoes. I immediately rummaged through my bag and pulled out the pair I'd carefully kept wrapped in cloth, specifically so her feet wouldn't freeze in the cold temple stone. I thought, bro, this is it. Smooth move. I'm about to score major points. But the second I handed them over, her face went completely red. She snapped at me, asking if I was some kind of pervert who wanted to smell her feet. I froze. My brain short-circuited. I stammered that I just wanted to keep her feet warm, but it was too late. She drew her sword, called me a perverted monkey, and declared my very existence a crime that needed to be purged. I literally turned around and ran for my life. She chased me, blade flashing, while everyone else stood there laughing their heads off. I mean, bro, I traveled through time to change the course of a nation, and now I'm sprinting through a temple courtyard because I accidentally offended a warlord's pride. Listen, don't ignore this moment. Because right here, I finally understood. This wasn't a strategy game anymore. This wasn't a screen I could pause. This was sweat. This was fear. This was laughter echoing through ancient halls. This was a path where every step demanded a piece of my soul. Nobuna's unbreakable fire, Dosan's quiet wisdom, Motoyasu's starving innocence, my own desperate scrambling to survive. It all painted a picture I knew I could never erase. I stopped running, looked up at the sky, and made a promise. To the wind itself. I'm staying. I'm fighting. I'm turning this dream into reality. Because the movie's still playing. And we've barely even started. So friends, this was today's story. To get the next story first, subscribe to our channel right now.